Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
සුසිනිදු freeze protected කෙස් කලඹකට Dove conditioners.
First at 9 tonight, this Thursday, the 3rd of November 2022. Crucial talks. Sri Lanka begins second round of debt restructuring talks with bilateral creditors to secure assurances in order to close bailout deal with the IMF.
We have not received the official financial assurances yet because they need further clarification and information is being required further.
Stagnant. President Ranil Wickremesinghe points out to the Speaker that Parliament has failed to make progress on almost all proposals to achieve systemic changes.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Indivadi Amuwata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. You're joining us on AdaDerana English News, first at 9 tonight. Sri Lanka says the country remains fully committed to advancing engagements with all creditors in an equitable and transparent manner. This was conveyed during the second round of talks with bilateral creditors, which got underway virtually today. Giving an update of today's round of talks to AdaDerana English News, State Minister of Finance Shrihant Semasinghe said creditors are requesting for more clarification from Sri Lanka to provide the financial assurances needed.
Sri Lanka held the second round of talks with bilateral creditors in a bid to obtain assurances from the creditors to restructure outstanding debt, a mandatory qualification to secure the International Monetary Fund's $2.9 billion bailout package, for which the staff-level agreement was reached on the 1st of September this year. Sri Lanka's first round of talks with bilateral creditors was held in Washington, D.C. last month on the sidelines of the World Bank and IMF annual meetings. During today's second round meetings with creditors, Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, said the crucial IMF program and economic reform agenda will help reconstitute Sri Lanka's financial buffers and should be secured without delay. Also attending today's creditor talks, State Minister of Finance Shrihant Semasinghe said the government is focused on re-establishing social and economic prosperity and ensuring that citizens have access to crucial public services, and that it is through the IMF program that Sri Lanka can soon restore macroeconomic stability. Speaking to AdaDerana English, Shrihant Semasinghe gave more details.
This was a follow-up meeting on the meeting what we held on the 14th of October in Washington. There were clarifications made by different creditors, and also the discussion will continue further. So far, all creditors have informed us that they will give their fullest support for the debt treatment process of Sri Lanka. However, we need official financial assurances from our creditors. We have not received the official financial assurances yet because they need further clarifications and information is being required further. The outcome of today's meeting will be discussed again. There will be further clarifications brought up by the creditors. So we will continue our dialogue with the assistance of the IMF and our legal as well as financial advisors. So we are happy that all creditors were in this meeting, and we hope we could get our assurances as soon as possible. The Paris Club members, China, India, who are the main creditors, participated.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe informs the Speaker that Parliament has been unable to make satisfactory progress pertaining to his proposals aimed at bringing about far-reaching systematic changes. The head of state, however, pointed out that these proposals can be implemented when next year's budget is implemented in order to bring about the systemic changes that he has envisioned.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe, in a letter addressed to Speaker of Parliament Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena, has notified him that although the formation of the National Assembly has concluded to bring far-reaching systematic changes, satisfactory progress has not been made with regard to other proposals. The establishment of a National Assembly and the appointment of 3 committees related to public finance and banking were proposed by the President to achieve far-reaching systematic changes. In addition, it was also proposed to appoint the Banking and Financial Services Committee, the Economic Stabilisation Committee, and the Committee on Ways and Means related to banking affairs, as well as to delegate 5 youth representatives for sectoral committees and to establish the Parliamentary Budget Office. President Ranil Wickremesinghe has expressed that although 17 parliamentary sectoral committees should be established as indicated by these proposals, the chairpersons have not been designated for them, and the criteria for selecting youth representatives to be appointed for the purpose is yet to be prepared. The President has further stated in his letter that these proposals can be implemented when next year's budget is implemented, and consequently the systematic change expected by the government will be achieved immediately. The draft bill for the Parliamentary Budget Office has also been approved by the Cabinet of Ministers, and the President has informed Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena that he intends to present it to Parliament after consultation with the party leaders and certification by the Attorney General.
Russia's largest charter airline, Azure Air, resumed flights to Sri Lanka today, flying 365 passengers to the Bandaranaike International Airport. Azure Air will now operate 7 flights to Sri Lanka per week. Sri Lanka, after the welcome ceremony, former Sri Lankan ambassador to Russia, Udayanga Veeratunga, said about 8,500 Russian tourists can be expected in the island every month with the resumption of Azure Air flights.
Russia's largest charter airline, Azure Air, resumed flight operations to Sri Lanka today with its first flight landing at the Bandaranaike International Airport with 335 passengers on board. The flight crew and passengers were welcomed by the Secretary to the Ministry of Tourism, Chula Nanda Pereira, and former ambassador to Russia, Udayanga Veeratunga. In the past 10 months, the number of Russian tourists to Sri Lanka amounted to 51,300. A Russian airline has not operated to Sri Lanka since early June, when an A330-300 operated by Russia's flagship carrier Aeroflot was grounded in Sri Lanka due to a legal dispute with the plane owner. Aeroflot resumed flights to BIA this October after a hiatus of 4 months. With Russia's largest charter airline Azure Air now operating to Sri Lanka, the island's tourism industry is expected to benefit a large from the Russian market in the winter season.
Starting tomorrow, 7 weekly flights will operate to Sri Lanka from 4 Russian cities. We hope to bring down 8,500 Russian tourists to the country. These tourists have planned to stay in the country for 10 days, but due to the Russia-Ukraine war, about 20% of them will stay back in Sri Lanka for 1 to 2 months.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has directed his government to increase the number of flights between Russia and friendly states. According to the Russian embassy in Sri Lanka, Russia will work closely with friendly nations as Sri Lanka. As a result of ongoing sanctions on Russia given the war in Ukraine, Russian airlines are barred from buying aircraft parts or maintenance services from Europe or the United States, adding to the pressure on the world's 11th largest aviation market from a ban on using North America and European airspace. Russia has, since last year, maintained and expanded a list of unfriendly countries, which includes the United States, the United Kingdom, EU member states and their Western allies in response to economic sanctions. In a closely watched anti-Western speech last week, Putin hailed African, Latin American and certain Asian countries as friendly countries of Russia. Now, Sri Lanka briefed the European Union that a comprehensive legislative proposal to replace the Prevention of Terrorism Act in accordance with the Constitution of Sri Lanka and in line with international norms and best practices will be finalized by next year. This was conveyed by the Sri Lankan party during a meeting of the 6th Working Group on Governance, Rule of Law and Human Rights, when concerns were raised by the European Union side on the recent use of the Prevention of Terrorism Act.
The 6th Working Group on Governance, Rule of Law and Human Rights met last week at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Colombo. The working group was co-chaired by Director General Europe, Central Asia, EU and the Commonwealth at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Varuni Muthukumarana, and Deputy Director of Head of South Asian Division of European External Action Service, Renst Tierink. During the meeting, the EU reaffirmed its commitment to support Sri Lanka's efforts to successfully overcome the current unprecedented economic crisis, including the necessary reforms and social protection measures, which would mitigate the adverse impact of the crisis and lead the country towards sustainable growth and prosperity. Both parties also reiterated the importance of social, economic and political inclusion through justice and reconciliation in the advancement of human rights. The working group was also updated on the electoral reform process, where the two sides expressed the importance of democratic freedoms of opinion and expression and the right to peaceful assembly and association. The EU acknowledged the steps taken by Sri Lanka in March this year to reform the Prevention of Terrorism Act and pointed the need for further action in line with its commitments. However, the EU expressed concern on the recent use of the PTA, and in response, Sri Lankan officials assured that the PTA has been invoked only in instances of extreme necessity. The EU also noted Sri Lanka's update on the release of detainees under the PTA between 2021 and 2022 and encouraged the release of long-term detainees under this legislation who have not been charged. Sri Lankan officials expressed their strong commitment to prepare a comprehensive legislative proposal to replace the PTA in accordance with the constitution and in line with international norms and best practices, with a view to its finalization in 2023. Both Sri Lankan officials and the EU also exchanged views on the legislative and other measures taken to protect the rights of women and children and action to advance labour rights, including the elimination of child labour. Further, the two sides discussed cooperation in the UN Human Rights Council, including treaty bodies, special procedures and the Universal Periodic Review process. The EU encouraged Sri Lanka to continue its engagement with the Human Rights Council and its mechanisms. During the meeting, the working group was updated on the GSP Plus monitoring process and its requirements, and the EU encouraged tangible progress by Sri Lanka on its GSP Plus commitment.
Why are fuel stations drying up? We'll find out details when we come back after this short break, as the petroleum minister says the reason is behind the fuel price reduction anticipated.
අයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයි යා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමුතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino Cement Roofing Sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3.
Welcome back to the news. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara says that non-placement of orders by dealers anticipating a price reduction in fuel has led to fuel stations drying up across the country. In a tweet, the minister stressed that there will be no fuel price revision this week and that the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and Lanka IOC both have ample stocks to fulfill requirements guaranteed by the National Fuel Pass. Thereby, the minister requested the dealers to place orders without delay to fulfill their requirements. Now, the Sri Lanka Customs intercepted 2 kilograms of methamphetamine tablets at the Central Mail Exchange today. The contraband was found hidden inside a parcel sent via a post from a German address to an individual residing in Angoda. According to Customs spokesperson and Director of Customs Sudat Silva, a total of 4,956 pills weighing up to 2 kilograms were taken into custody. The contraband has been handed over to the officers of the Police Narcotics Bureau for further investigations. And we take you to business news. The Colombo bourse dived further into negative territory as sentiment was lackluster among investors. Participation was low ahead of budget 2023. Although the main index, the all-share price index, moved positively. during the initial hours of the session today. Subsequently, it began to plunge steeply as Sampath Bank and Expo Lanka's selling spree brought down the index and closed for the day at 8,509, losing 53 points. However, retail favourites LIOC witnessed some buying during the latter part of the session upon Power and Energy Minister's statement confirming that there will be no fuel price revision during the week. Meanwhile, turnover remained flat at 1.2 billion rupees, with the transportation sector dominating the overall turnover contribution, followed by the food and staples retaining a sector due to off-board transactions of Cargills amounting to 205.7 million rupees, followed by Associated Newspapers of Ceylon Limited selling their stake of 914,103 shares at 225 each. Now, the Federal Reserve once again raised interest rates by 0.75 of a percentage point today, saying it's against inflation will require borrowing costs to rise further. Yet the US Central Bank signaled it may be nearing an inflection point in what has become the swiftest tightening of US monetary policy in 40 years.
The double-sided message left open the possibility the US Central Bank may raise rates in smaller increments in the future, ending its sequence of 0.75 of a percentage point hikes as soon as December in favor of more tempered increases of perhaps 0.5 percentage point, while also leaving policymakers room to continue pushing rates higher if inflation doesn't start to slow. Speaking in a news conference after the Fed raised rates by 75 basis points for a fourth consecutive meeting, Federal Reserve's Chair Jerome Powell said that there is a significant uncertainty around the level of rates needed to bring down inflation, but there is still some ways to go. Powell also said there remains a chance that the US economy can escape a recession as the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to lower inflation, but that window of opportunity for a soft landing has narrowed this year as price pressures have also been slow to ease.
My colleagues and I are strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve and serves as the bedrock of our economy. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone.
Well, that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9 on AdaDerana 24. Thank you for watching us. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.